There was a time when New York's wealthiest families filled grand mansions along Fifth Avenue, during what became known as the Gilded Age. At the same time, a new kind of luxury was rising in the city. Lavish apartment buildings for millionaires, with marble lobbies and sweeping views of Central Park. These residences quickly became some of the most fashionable addresses in Manhattan. And it all began with a daring idea: Marble Row. In 1869, a striking row of white marble mansions appeared along Fifth Avenue at East 57th Street, a bold statement in a city still defined by brownstone and brick. Mary Mason Jones commissioned the project, believing the wealthiest New Yorkers would eventually migrate north, away from the crowded streets below 42nd. Her vision gave rise to Marble Row, a line of residences that looked more like French chateaux than anything else in Manhattan. Each mansion gleamed in the sunlight, its carved facades and sweeping staircases a signal that elite New York had arrived on a new stage. Mary herself lived at the corner house, observing as powerful families, the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and other elites, followed her, reshaping the avenue into the city's new epicenter of wealth. Marble Row was a social theater. It was more than just an architectural trend. Polished carriages clattered along the cobblestones, and salons hosted the whispered gossip and delicate intrigues of old money. The grandeur of Marble Row was a statement. Here, wealth was visible and monumental, an almost tangible presence along the avenue. For the first time, Fifth Avenue signaled that Manhattan could be a playground for society's most elite families, where style and power were inseparable. Yet even as Marble Row rose in all its brilliance, the seeds of change were already taking root. Vertical living and new innovations were on the horizon, ready to challenge the mansion's dominance. Soon, the grandeur of Fifth Avenue would soon reach an even more extravagant peak. High society at its peak. Yes, the Vanderbilts. Remember them from our story on Grand Central Terminal? One of Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandsons, William Kissam Vanderbilt, was shaping Manhattan's social scene as much as his family had shaped the city's infrastructure. In 1883, he hosted a fancy costume ball at his home, the Petit Chateau, located at 665th Avenue at 52nd Street. Guests included New York's wealthiest families, Astors, Guillettes, and other old money elites, dressed in elaborate costumes inspired by European royalty and historical figures. Newspapers reported every detail, from decorations to music, and even the order in which guests arrived. Inside the chateau, each room buzzed with festivities. Staff managed every detail, keeping the household running smoothly and maintaining the strict social hierarchy. These events were statements of influence and prestige. They also had other grand residences. William H. Vanderbilt's Triple Palace at 51st and 52nd Streets, which set a new standard for luxury, and his son, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the second's 137-room mansion on West 57th Street, the largest private residence ever built in New York City, showcasing just how immense and influential the family had become. Even as private homes dominated Fifth Avenue, new luxury apartments were rising. Buildings that promised a different kind of prestige, vertical living with modern conveniences that would eventually challenge private mansions. Two sides of New York. While Fifth Avenue saw grand mansions, much of New York looked very different. After the Civil War, waves of immigration brought thousands of families to the city, and housing couldn't keep up. Streets like Mott Street in Chinatown became crowded with narrow alleys and tenement buildings, where multiple families shared cramped, poorly lit apartments. Tenements were typically 4 to 5 stories tall, with small 300 to 400 square foot units. A unit with a single bedroom and a tiny kitchen had to fit entire families. The buildings had poor ventilation and were cramped, leaving families exposed to sickness and other dangers. These buildings were built poorly, and the conditions highlighted a stark contrast to the luxury just a few blocks away. The city tried to cope by packing more people into the same spaces. Jobs in factories and workshops drew families downtown, and these high-rise, high-density buildings became a grim necessity. Families lived stacked on top of each other, and the realities of urban life were harsh. Smoke-filled air and the constant hum of a city growing faster than its infrastructure. Yet these extremes of wealth and poverty existed side by side. One street just casually hosting a grand gala in a marble mansion, while the next holding crowded tenements filled with newly arrived families struggling to survive. The contrast was not just social, but architectural: stone and marble towers versus tight brick and wood buildings. Amid the extremes of wealth and poverty, Manhattan found a middle ground: elegant apartments that offered prestige and practicality in one building. The Dakota Apartments. The age of private mansions was meeting the practicality of city life, and the Dakota Apartments were born. Completed in 1884 on the Upper West Side, became the first true luxury apartment building in New York. 8 stories may not seem tall today, but at the time, it was revolutionary. No one had ever lived that high above the ground. Elevators were a new innovation at the time, allowing residents to reach their apartments with ease. While separate service elevators carried staff and deliveries without disturbing the families. Even smaller dumbwaiters, tiny elevators used to move food, laundry, or parcels between floors, made it possible to offer room service and other conveniences throughout the building. Architect Henry J. Hardenberg designed the Dakota around a central courtyard, offering residents privacy and open space. Massive arched entrances led into this courtyard rather than the lobby, and residents could access their homes without encountering delivery staff or tradespeople. The building included opulent amenities: a dining room, gymnasium, croquet lawn, tennis court, central heat, and even room service, complete with a network of dumbwaiters. The Dakota worked because it solved multiple challenges at once. Families gained the privacy and scale of a mansion, but without the sprawling grounds and endless maintenance. The design also respected social hierarchies. Residents and staff moved on separate paths, preserving the exclusivity and etiquette expected by Gilded Age tenants. The Dakota itself would later become famous for another reason. It was home to many artists and musicians, including John Lennon of the Beatles, who lived there with his wife, Yoko Ono. In 1980, Lennon was tragically shot and killed just outside the building's entrance, forever linking the Dakota to one of the most shocking moments in music history. Other buildings soon followed. The Dorilton, finished in 1902, featured Beaux-Arts design, a style imported from France that emphasized symmetry and elaborate sculptural details that made it a standout on Broadway. 2 years later, the Ansonia, completed in 1904, added even more grandeur with a copper roof, ornate facade, and spaces for social gatherings and performances. Together, these buildings transformed apartment living into a symbol of status, blending convenience with luxury in ways that private mansions never could. Amenities in these new residences were equally impressive. Residents could enjoy all the comforts of a grand house without ever leaving their building. A novel idea at the time that reshaped urban living forever. But soon, an era was about to end. The end of mansions. By the early 20th century, Fifth Avenue was beginning to change. The stretch that once held rows of private mansions was becoming far too valuable to remain residential. Land prices surged, businesses moved north, and many of the grand homes that had defined the Gilded Age started to disappear. Some were demolished to make way for office towers, department stores, and modern apartment buildings. Others were briefly repurposed as social venues or institutional spaces before eventually being torn down. What had once been one of the most exclusive residential corridors in America slowly transformed into a busy commercial district. The Vanderbilt homes illustrate this shift clearly. William H. Vanderbilt's Triple Palace was demolished in the early 1900s. The enormous Cornelius Vanderbilt II mansion met a similar fate in the 1920s. After Cornelius Vanderbilt II's death, his widow Alice C. Vanderbilt decided to sell the property, as the taxes and upkeep of such a massive home had become difficult to maintain. In hindsight, the timing was almost fortunate. Just a few years later, the Great Depression would shake the economy, making the maintenance of enormous Gilded Age mansions even harder to justify. The era of the Fifth Avenue Palace was ending, as Manhattan grew taller, denser, and increasingly commercial. Remnants of the Gilded Age. Although many mansions disappeared, the Gilded Age never vanished entirely from New York. Walk through parts of Manhattan today, and you can still find traces of that era in stone facades and grand apartment houses that have stood for more than a century. Buildings like the Dorilton, the Dakota Apartments, and the Ansonia remain striking reminders of the moment when luxury moved upward into the skyline. Their heavy masonry walls and dramatic entrances still reflect the ambition of architects and developers who wanted apartment living to rival the grandeur of private palaces. A few Gilded Age mansions also survived the wave of demolition. Some were converted into museums, cultural institutions, or luxury residences, allowing pieces of that extravagant world to remain visible in the modern city. One of the last surviving Gilded Age mansions in Manhattan is the House of Cassini, an 8-story mansion at 15 East 63rd Street, designed by architect John H. Duncan. It has appeared on the luxury market through Sotheby's International Realty, showing that even today, the prestige of this era still carries enormous value. New York may have grown taller and more modern, but its skyline still holds fragments of the Gilded Age, gentle reminders of a time when wealth and ambition reshaped the city forever. The Gilded Age left its mark on Manhattan forever. To explore more secrets of the city's history, join me in this next video.